Trump makes huge mistake facing Crockett at press conference. The ending will leave you speechless. The Rose Garden press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday in late March, and by 1:45, the rows of white folding chairs were already filled with correspondents adjusting their camera angles and testing their audio feeds. The spring air carried that particular quality of light that makes everything look slightly overexposed, slightly too bright, as if the universe itself were leaning in to watch what was about to unfold. Donald Trump entered from the West Wing colonnade exactly on time, which was unusual enough to merit notice from the press corps who had covered him for years. He moved with that familiar forward-leaning gait, shoulders squared, red tie swinging, and he took the podium with the physical confidence of someone who believed he had already won whatever contest was about to begin. He did not know that Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was seated in the third row, a manila folder resting on her lap, her expression serene and utterly still. Trump began without preamble, launching into what he clearly believed was a victory lap regarding his administration's economic record. The numbers came fast and declarative. Unemployment at record lows, stock market at unprecedented heights, trade deals that no previous administration could have negotiated. His delivery had that familiar rhythm, the pauses for emphasis, the slight lean forward when he wanted a point to land harder. And then, midway through a sentence about manufacturing jobs returning to the heartland, he stopped. His eyes had found Crockett in the third row. There was a beat of recognition, something shifting in his expression, and then he departed entirely from whatever prepared remarks might have existed. He pointed directly at her, and his voice took on that edge it gets when he believes he has identified an opponent worth humiliating in public. "You know, I see we have Congresswoman Crockett here today." "That's interesting." "Very interesting. Because I've been hearing a lot about her lately. A lot of people talking, and I have to say, I'm not impressed. I mean, she's been in Congress, what, a minute? Maybe 2 minutes? And she's already trying to make a name for herself, going after successful businessmen, going after job creators, going after people who actually built something instead of just talking about it. It's very typical, frankly. Very typical of what we're seeing from the radical left. No experience, no accomplishments, but a lot of big talk. The press corps shifted in their seats, recognizing the tone, the setup. Cameras swiveled slightly toward Crockett, capturing her reaction, which was no reaction at all. She had not moved. The folder remained closed on her lap. Her hands rested on top of it with perfect stillness. Trump continued, warming to his theme now, playing to the audience he knew was watching beyond the Rose Garden. "I built a real estate empire. I created thousands of jobs. I negotiated deals all over the world before most of these congresspeople even knew what a real contract looked like. So when someone like her stands up and starts questioning my business record, my financial dealings, my tax returns, I have to laugh. I really do. Because what has she built? What deals has she closed? She's a freshman congresswoman from Texas who thinks reading a prepared statement in a hearing makes her some kind of expert on how business works in the real world. It's actually sad when you think about it. Actually very sad." He paused, clearly expecting some response from her, some visible reaction that would justify his next attack. When none came, when she simply sat there with that same composed stillness, he interpreted the silence as weakness rather than preparation. It was the critical mistake, though he would not understand that for another 43 minutes. "So I just want to say for the record that when people with no business experience, no real-world knowledge, start making accusations based on documents they don't understand, taken out of context by partisan operatives who have been trying to destroy me since day one, it's not serious governance. It's performance. It's theater. And the American people see right through it." He returned to his prepared remarks then, believing he had landed the blow, believing the moment had passed. He spoke for another 12 minutes about regulatory rollbacks and energy independence and judicial appointments. The press asked their questions. He gave his answers. And then, as the event was clearly winding down as reporters were beginning to gather their equipment and the White House press team was signaling that the conference was concluding, Crockett stood up. She did not raise her hand. She did not wait to be called on. She simply rose to her full height, the folder now held in both hands in front of her, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the Rose Garden with perfect clarity, no strain, no elevation, just absolute projection. "Mr. President, if I may." Trump's head turned. There was surprise in the movement and something else, something that looked almost like curiosity. He had expected her to slink away, to take the insult and save her response for a cable news hit later that evening. The fact that she was standing now, addressing him directly, seemed to genuinely interest him. "I appreciate your comments about my experience and qualifications," Crockett said, and her tone was so perfectly polite, so utterly devoid of defensiveness, that it took a moment for the press corps to register that she was not conceding anything at all. I am indeed a freshman congresswoman. That's accurate. I've been in office for just over 14 months. But before I was elected to Congress, I spent 11 years as a civil rights attorney in Dallas, Texas, where I specialized in cases involving financial fraud, employment discrimination, and housing rights violations. I tried 43 cases to verdict. I won 38 of them. So when it comes to reading complex financial documents, understanding contractual obligations, and identifying patterns of behavior that constitute fraud under federal and state law, I do have some small amount of experience. She opened the folder as she spoke the last sentence, and the way she did it, with the gentleness of someone handling something both valuable and dangerous, created a physical tension in the space. The press corps, which had been preparing to leave, settled back into their seats. Cameras that had been lowered were raised again. "But let's not make this about credentials," Crockett continued, her eyes never leaving Trump's face. "Let's make it about documentation, because you mentioned that accusations have been made based on documents taken out of context. I'd like to address that. Specifically, I'd like to address your claim that your businesses created thousands of jobs and that you've always operated with complete transparency regarding your financial obligations." Trump's expression had changed now. The performative confidence was still there, but underneath it something harder had appeared, something defensive. "I've created tens of thousands of jobs," he said, leaning into the microphone. "More jobs than you could even count." "Let's count them together then," Crockett said, and she removed the first document from her folder, holding it up so the cameras could capture it, though from the distance no one could read the text. "This is a deposition transcript from a 2007 lawsuit filed by Trump Entertainment Resorts bondholders. You were asked, under oath, how many people you employed directly across all your properties. Your answer, which I'm reading from page 147 of the official court record, was, quote, 'It depends on the season and the property, but I'd say in the range of 12 to 14,000 people directly employed.' End quote. 12 to 14,000. That's the number you gave under oath when you were legally obligated to tell the truth." She set the first document on her chair and removed a second from the folder. "This is a transcript from a rally you held in Michigan in October of last year, where you stated, and I quote, 'I've employed hundreds of thousands of people over my career. Nobody has created more jobs than me. Nobody.' End quote. So we have 14,000 under oath, and hundreds of thousands when there are no legal consequences for exaggeration. That's not a small discrepancy. That's a multiplication of your actual employment footprint by a factor of at least 15. Trump's jaw tightened visibly. "Those numbers don't account for indirect employment, construction jobs, supplier jobs, the whole economic ecosystem that my projects create." "You're absolutely right," Crockett said, and the agreement was so unexpected that Trump visibly paused. "Economic impact studies do measure indirect job creation, so let's use the industry standard multiplier for commercial real estate development, which is approximately 3 indirect jobs for every direct job created. If we apply that to your sworn testimony of 14,000 direct employees, the total economic footprint would be approximately 32,000 jobs. That's significant. That's genuinely impressive. But it's not hundreds of thousands. And more importantly, it's not the only relevant number we need to examine." She was already removing the third document before Trump could formulate a response. The rhythm was deliberate, relentless, each piece of paper arriving exactly when the previous point had landed but before any defense could fully form. "This is a Freedom of Information Act request response from the Department of Labor, dated February of this year. It contains a list of all federal labor violations filed against Trump-branded properties between 1999 and 2023. There are 63 separate complaints. 38 of them involve failure to pay contractors for completed work. 18 involve failure to pay overtime wages to hourly employees. 7 involve retaliation against workers who filed wage theft complaints. Every single one of these represents a job that you did create, Mr. President, and then refused to fully compensate." The press corps had gone completely silent now. The only sounds were the wind moving through the rose garden trees and the mechanical clicks of camera shutters firing in continuous bursts. Trump's hands gripped the edges of the podium, and his voice when he spoke had risen half an octave. "Those are disputed claims. Frivolous lawsuits filed by people looking for a payout. Anyone who's built anything significant gets sued. It's the cost of doing business." 26 of them settled, Crockett said, and her voice had not changed at all, had not risen to meet his, had remained in that same zone of clinical precision. 26 cases where your legal teams negotiated settlements rather than proceed to trial. And in federal civil procedure, settlements typically occur when the defendant's legal counsel advises that the plaintiff's case has sufficient merit to pose a trial risk. So these weren't frivolous. These were cases strong enough that your own attorneys recommended paying them rather than defending them in open court. She set the third document down and removed a fourth, this one visibly thicker than the others, multiple pages stapled together. But let's talk about a specific case, because I think specificity matters when we're discussing your record as an employer. This is the case file for Andre Espinoza, a tile contractor who worked on the Trump International Hotel renovation in Washington, D.C. in 2016. Mr. Espinoza's company completed $78,000 worth of custom stonework. The work was inspected and approved by your project managers. But when Mr. Espinoza submitted his final invoice, he received a letter from your legal team offering him $32,000 as full payment. The letter stated that if he did not accept this reduced payment, he would receive nothing and would be tied up in litigation for years. Mr. Espinoza had 4 employees and a business loan. He could not afford to wait years. So he took the $32,000, which was less than half of what his contract stipulated, and 6 months later, his business went under. Those 4 jobs you created? They don't exist anymore. The silence that followed this was not the absence of sound. It was an active thing, a physical presence in the rose garden. Trump's face had gone a deep red, the color creeping up from his collar to his hairline. His hands were no longer just gripping the podium. They were white-knuckled, bearing weight. That's a one-sided story, he managed. There were quality issues. There are always disputes in construction. That's why contracts have negotiation clauses. His contract didn't have a negotiation clause for post-completion payment reduction, Crockett said. I have the contract right here. She held up another document, thinner this time, and the camera zooms caught the visible signature at the bottom. Page 9, Section 4, Subsection C. Payment terms are fixed upon completion and approval of work. There is no provision allowing for unilateral reduction of the agreed-upon price after the work has been inspected and approved. What happened to Mr. Espinoza wasn't a negotiation. It was a choice you made to pay him less than half of what you owed him, and when he objected, your legal team made it clear that fighting you would destroy him financially, so he took the loss. And you kept $46,000 that belonged to him. Trump had stopped looking at her directly now. His eyes were moving across the press corps, perhaps looking for a friendly face, perhaps calculating how to end this, how to regain control of a situation that had slipped entirely out of his hands. Crockett continued, and there was something implacable in her now, something that had moved beyond prosecutorial and into the realm of moral accounting. Mr. Espinoza is not an isolated case. I have 11 more just like him. Contractors who completed work, had it approved, and then received payment offers ranging from 30 to 60% of their invoiced amounts. When they objected, your attorneys sent them letters threatening prolonged litigation. Most of them settled for less than they were owed. 3 of them went bankrupt. 1 of them lost his house. These are the jobs you created, Mr. President. And then you chose not to fully pay for them. She set the contractor's files down on her chair, a stack now visibly growing, and removed what appeared to be a spreadsheet from the folder. This is a comprehensive accounting, compiled by my office, of all publicly documented cases where Trump Organization entities or Trump-branded properties either settled wage disputes or were found liable for underpayment between 2000 and 2024. The total value of unpaid or partially paid wages, adjusted for inflation, is $11.4 million. That's money that workers earned. That's money you chose not to give them. So when you stand at this podium and talk about job creation, I think we need to be precise about what kind of jobs you created. You created jobs and then you underpaid the people who did them. Trump's voice when he finally spoke was different now, tighter, more controlled, but also more brittle. You're cherry-picking cases. You're taking the worst examples and pretending they're representative of decades of business. That's dishonest. That's what partisan operatives do when they can't argue the facts. I am arguing the facts, Crockett said, and for the first time there was something in her voice that was not clinical, something that carried an edge that was colder than anger, more dangerous. The fact is that you have a documented pattern of underpaying workers. The fact is that when confronted with this pattern, your defense is that business is complicated and disputes happen. But the fact is also that this pattern does not appear in the records of your competitors. I pulled comparable labor dispute records for Hilton, Marriott, and Hyatt over the same time period. Their settlement rates for wage disputes are between 1/8 and 1/12 of yours. Their average settlement amounts as a percentage of claimed wages are substantially higher, meaning they paid closer to what was owed rather than negotiating down to fractions. This isn't normal business practice. This is your business practice. She removed another document from the folder, and Trump's eyes followed it the way someone might track a weapon being drawn. But let's move beyond employment, because you also mentioned your tax returns and how questions about them are partisan attacks. I'd like to address that directly. This is a public summary of the New York Attorney General's investigation into Trump Organization financial practices, specifically the practice of reporting different asset values to different entities depending on whether you were seeking loans or calculating tax obligations. The investigation found that between 2011 and 2021, properties were routinely valued at 2 to 3 times their actual appraised worth when presented to lenders and at 1/3 to 1/2 their appraised worth when presented to tax authorities. That's not aggressive accounting. That's fraud. And it resulted in a $250 million judgment against your organization. Trump's hand came up palm out, a gesture that in any other context might have looked authoritative but in this moment read as defensive, almost pleading. That case is under appeal. It was a politically motivated prosecution by a partisan DA who campaigned on a promise to get Trump. The whole thing is a witch hunt. The judge in that case, Crockett said, and her voice had returned to that measured cadence, that rhythm that made every word feel inevitable rather than argued, was appointed by a Republican governor. The evidence presented included your organization's own internal documents, your own spreadsheets, your own emails discussing the valuation discrepancies. The judge's ruling described the pattern as, and I'm quoting from page 62 of the decision, a persistent and calculated scheme to misrepresent asset values for financial gain. Or, that's not partisan interpretation. That's a judicial finding based on documents your own employees created. She set the legal summary on the growing stack and removed a thin sheaf of papers clipped together. But here's what I find most interesting, Mr. President. You mentioned transparency. You mentioned that accusations against you are based on documents taken out of context. So let me ask you a direct question, and I'd appreciate a direct answer. She looked at him fully now, and the cameras caught the moment, the perfect stillness of her posture, the folder now almost empty in her hands, and Trump's face, red and tight and visibly struggling to maintain composure. You have claimed that you cannot release your personal tax returns because they are under audit. You have maintained this position since 2016. But the IRS has publicly stated that being under audit does not prevent anyone from releasing their tax returns. Richard Nixon released his returns while under audit. So my question is simple. If your financial dealings are as transparent as you claim, if the accusations against you are baseless and partisan, why not release your complete tax returns right now and let the American people see for themselves? The silence that followed was unlike any that had come before. 10 seconds. 15. 20. The wind had died completely, as if the rose garden itself were holding its breath. Trump's mouth opened, closed, opened again. His eyes moved from Crockett to the press corps to some middle distance where nothing existed. 25 seconds. Someone in the press gallery coughed, and the sound was shockingly loud in the stillness. 30 seconds. When Trump finally spoke, his voice was rough, scraped raw. My tax returns are nobody's business but mine and the IRS. I've been audited for years. I've paid millions in taxes. Millions. More than anyone. And I don't owe anyone an explanation when partisan hacks try to weaponize the tax code against political opponents. That's not an answer to the question, Crockett said quietly. The question was whether you would release them to prove the transparency you claim to represent. And you just said no. Which is your right, absolutely your right under the law. But it does make it difficult to take seriously your claims that investigations into your finances are baseless when you refuse to provide the one piece of documentation that would conclusively prove your case. She closed the folder then, though it was not quite empty, and when she spoke again her voice carried a different quality, something beyond the clinical precision, something that felt older and more tired and more certain. I want to be very clear about something. I didn't come here today to humiliate you. I came here because you stood at that podium and questioned my qualifications, my experience, and my right to examine your record. You suggested that I don't understand business, that I don't understand contracts, that I'm simply performing for partisan purposes. And I wanted to demonstrate, using your own documented history, your own sworn testimony, your own organization's internal records, that my questions about your business practices are not partisan attacks. They are accountability. They are the same questions that any responsible legislator should ask of any public official who has a documented pattern of underpaying workers, misrepresenting asset values, and fighting transparency at every turn. Trump's hands had left the podium. His whole posture had changed, contracted somehow, and his voice when he interrupted her was higher than it had been at any point in the press conference. This is what I'm talking about. This is exactly what the radical left does. They take normal business disputes and they weaponize them. They ignore context. They ignore that I've created more wealth, more jobs, more opportunity than anyone in this room will ever create. And they reduce everything to a gotcha game because that's all they have. They can't run on policy. They can't run on results. So they run on tearing down success. Mr. President, Crockett said, and there was something almost gentle in how she said it, almost sad. I haven't torn down anything. I've just read your own words back to you. I've presented your own documents. I've cited court findings based on evidence your organization produced. If that feels like an attack, perhaps the problem isn't with the documentation. Perhaps the problem is with the behavior the documentation reveals. She picked up the folder and the stack of papers from her chair, holding them against her chest like a kind of shield, and she looked at him one last time. You began this press conference by saying you've built something. And you have. You've built a brand. You've built buildings with your name on them. You've built a political movement. But you've also built a documented record of underpaying the workers who built those buildings, misrepresenting the value of those properties to avoid taxes, and attacking anyone who asks questions about that record.